for Zoom mostly, not for here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. Hi, Sarah. Thank you all for coming today. This is part of the Center for Mindfulness Science speaker series, co-hosted today by the Psychedelic Student Interest Group. I'm Ra'el Khan. I've been leading the Center for Mindfulness Science for 6 years now. And I'm very happy to introduce for the second day in a row, my old friend and colleague, Joe Tafur. Joe and I went to medical school at UCSD, starting back in September of '99. So we've been on this journey together for many years. And it's really nice to see that the world is catching up to this interest of ours, which 15, 20 years ago was very niche kind of interest to be bridging the worlds of science and spirit generally, and specifically to be using psychedelics in any clinical manner. I'm not going to do too much introductions of Joe today, unless you prefer I do. But I will say that we have about 40 books, 30, we have enough, that if anyone wants a book, The Fellowship of the River, that Joe wrote about his journey from, well, really a life story, but specifically from medical training as a medical student to medical doctor to ayahuasquero, and the clinical work and case studies involved in the discovery of the efficacy of this particular form of medicine. That book is a very good summary of that journey. And so without further ado, thanks for being here today, Joe.
Thank you, Ra'el. Oh, thank you, everybody. Nice to be here with everyone. Thanks for having me at USC. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules. We know what medical school is like. So we're getting invited to talk about, this is a talk I kind of designed for medical students. I mean, hopefully it's useful to you and you're thinking, about what you're learning about. I don't know what year are you all, or what is this? First year. So I don't know. What, is he your anatomy teacher? Yeah. Okay, we're all here then. So I'm titling the talk Sacred Ceremony and Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy. So Ra'el, I went to medical school with Ra'el, and I did family medicine at UCLA, did some research at UCSD, and I started going down to Peru in 2007, getting deeply involved in the Shipibo traditional Amazonian plant medicine, indigenous tradition from there. Started a healing center down there with led by one of the traditional healers, Ricardo Amaringo, from 2011, 2017, lived kind of deeply in that world. And I did Center for Integrative Medicine recently, just finished that. And I've been doing a lot of different things. I have this book. We're going to give you this book for whoever was nice enough to come show up to the talk. And it's called Fellowship of the River. And my point of the book is being a medical doctor that is down there in the Amazon watching people come from the United States, from Europe, from so many places. And people have heard me talk, probably already heard all this, but for USC, I wanted to present this stuff. Seeing people get better from problems that I, as a common practice doctor, knew that we couldn't help those people, and seeing them get better rapidly, and very curious about how that was possible and how they did that and following all those cases. And so I wrote a book about it, and following about 10 cases. And what I say is that what I saw down there, what were people finding? And this is what the psychedelic renaissance is kind of opening this issue here in medicine, is that they found a system that would acknowledge the emotional side of their illness and acknowledge a spiritual dimension. That those were in the Amazon, that's totally okay to talk about and work with, and they have ways to address those things. And you saw these transformations happen sometimes when they found a system like that. So here, we have a good friend here. We have a spiritual community in Arizona dedicated to this prophecy of the eagle and the condor. One of our lawyers is here. Gail's here from California. Thank you, Gail, for being here with his wife. There's this prophecy that's just interesting because a version of this prophecy from the Inca people, the Andes of Peru, was that there was going to be these big periods of time of change. And one of them, they called the Pachacuti, was 1492 to 1522, when the Europeans arrived to the Americas. And that was going to be this big cataclysmic change here. And that the indigenous people would, that there'd be great suffering and tragedy for them, for their culture, for their wisdom, for all those practices. And then that would go on for 500 years. And then from 1992 to 2022, there would be this other big change. And something would change. And they would start sharing their culture again, and other things would be changing. And then this change would be marked by mental health crisis in Western society. That would be marked by ecological disaster and the need to kind of redirect the culture. Interestingly enough, the same time period is approximately the time period of this psychedelic clinical renaissance. The beginning of research with DMT in the early 90s at University of New Mexico until now, where we're sitting right here, it's prophesized several centuries ago, like this is the year that MDMA supposedly is going to get approved for therapeutic use in August, as far as we know. Psilocybin is right behind. So halfway through that Pachacuti, through that 30-year period, about 15 years in, is me going for the first time after residency, family medicine residency, to Peru, to meeting Ricardo Maringo, ayahuasquero, traditional healer from his culture, Shipibo, indigenous Amazonian. And so I got exposed to him and to ayahuasca ceremony and the way they handle it and their whole system of medicine, their system of healing, which within their culture is a system of spiritual practice. It's not separated. And so that's a big difference. And that's part of this reintegration that the psychedelic renaissance is reopening this interest in spirituality, within the confines of the medical institutions. This is Niwerao, Centro Espiritual, from the air, from a drone. We're on the edge of a massive national forest in the Amazon. Like when you come on the plane, it's like an ocean of jungle around us. And so that's where we would take people flying from all over the world to receive healing from traditional people. We started getting students. We've had medical students. These are naturopathic medical students. So for us, it's like this eagle and the condor phenomenon where medical students were coming down to learn from traditional Amazonians according to their tradition and go through the process of healing, which would be how you learn in that tradition. What you go through to be healed is the same process that you do through the education. To learn how to become a healer in that tradition means you went through the healing. So it's these interesting times that we live in, there's this giant Andean condor here showing itself. So this new age, according to the prophecy, this re-encounter of all the elements that have suffered separation during humanity's prior unfolding. All these things coming together, where somebody like myself, my family's from Colombia, South America, that I'd be invited to USC to talk about, what I learned in the jungle. Like that hasn't happened for the last 500 years. This is maybe the first time. So the book reviews this kind of approach from the traditional Shipibo people, traditional Amazonian plant medicine, which is this broader field across the entire Amazon, so many different traditions. And down there with Ricardo, you put people on this vegetalista diet. So everyone that comes down, these different people, no matter what they have wrong with them, most of them are going to be put on this certain very restricted diet. They're going to go into spiritual retreat. That's part of their healing. And they're going to go live in the forest, eat very, very simple, no salt, no sugar, no oily food, no spicy food, no dairy, no red meat, no pork, no sex, no alcohol, no drugs. Very clean way. And they're going to be taking these master plants, maestra, planta maestra, just a plant that it's just not psychoactive, that has like a homeopathic kind of effect, that's going to be taking that plant to help you in your process. And then that is the primary treatment, is to go through the dieta and to take the master plant, for a week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months. Then, in addition to that, then you're invited to ayahuasca ceremony. In ayahuasca ceremony, the patient or the client, or the participant, the recipient, does not necessarily have to drink ayahuasca, but they can if they would like. And especially at Niwerao, where we worked, you were welcome to drink ayahuasca. as tolerated, not pushing big doses, but, you let people try it and get to know it. The treatment that goes on during the ceremony is through song. That's called ikaro. That is the primary form of treatment that goes on in the ceremony. So that tradition is around that, and that is how the cases that I'm going to talk to you about, that is what they received. And they say they achieved both mental and physical healing through these spiritual techniques. So the book presents these cases, PTSD case, unexplainable chronic cough, Crohn's disease, right inflammatory bowel disease, the psoriasis. You're familiar with these things, I think. You're first year medical student, but you've heard of these problems. Migraine, headache, addiction, depression. So I say, here you are in medical school and we're learning pharmacology and you're learning all this stuff. You have to learn all the receptors and the neurons to understand, how the pharmacology works, right? Like the reason that the beta blocker works is because you have beta adrenergic receptors. So if a variety of illnesses that would be regarded as very different, by a family practice doctor, go out and get out on the training and say, oh, you have PTSD, or you send them to the psychiatrist, psoriasis, they're going to go to the dermatologist, Crohn's disease, they're going to go gastroenterologist, but they're all getting better from what I just showed you. That implies a common physiology. If the same treatment is working, then there must be a common physiology at work, so that's the concern. So what is that? Right? That's the question mark. That's what the book is about. So we're trying to understand what that is. And so then, the patient is the bridge, illuminating the intersection. And so, like I say, there's a mind-body pair. Mind-body is pretty welcome, even at these institutions, mind-body. You can say mind-body at USC. It's modern. When we were starting, maybe that was kind of new. Now it's pretty standard. A lot of traditions, I'm talking about Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, indigenous forms of healing here in the Americas. They also talk about another pair, like the emotional body and the way that pairs to the energy, metaphysical or mystical access, that's a pair. So I created this little drawing based on what I was teaching from my book. And on one side is the spiritual metaphysical side, the Shipibo kind of, view of what's going on. And the other side is allopathic, think trauma, stress, allostatic load, should be hopefully making its way to medical school. Maybe not, pretty delayed. Allostatic load, useful. Epigenetics, is epigenetics part of like the basic curriculum now? Good question, right? Is it? I don't know. I don't think so. It's a little delayed. We're always a little behind. It's like, here we are, decades. Neurogenic inflammation, more obscure topic. So I'm saying, that down there, people say, we're singing to these people in the medicine, in the ceremony, and we're interacting with them spiritually, energetically, and that pairs in and allows us to get access to their emotional being. And so people have these deep emotional healings, and that was the common physiology. When I list those cases, those people that got better, and those are the cases, I'm not saying everyone got better like that, but those cases were people that transformed rapidly. When I say Crohn's disease, I'm saying the guy showed up with bloody diarrhea, bending over abdominal pain for years, 2 surgeries, bowel resection, decades. Also, turns out he's depressed. Turns out comorbidity in Crohn's disease with depression is very high. How much does that get investigated in a family medicine clinic? In my experience, not that often. So then you go through this 2 or 3 week treatment with the Shipibos. He's no longer having diarrhea. He's no longer bleeding. He's no longer in pain. Like objective, obvious measures. Like he's not going to the bathroom. You could tell he's okay. So he had a big emotional healing. So did the other one. So did the other one. So did the other one. And so then the book explores this emotional body. What is the emotional body? And this is my concept out to the medical schools. From mind-body research and that field is this idea that there's a psychoneuroendocrine immunologic network, the PNEI network. I'm suggesting that is the emotional body. That is the apparatus that would parallel other concepts from Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or other traditions. That is actually, you can show that emotional trauma will cause disturbance in multiple aspects of the PNEI network. you can show that this profound healing will lead to a shift in that physiology. So this PNAI network is starting to look like this common physiology point, that I'm bringing up. And just briefly, what is the process that people go through? What you're guiding them through, what the history people know how to guide them through is, yeah, there's a lot of energetic stuff, there's some metaphysical stuff, but ultimately people are going through like a forgiveness process, they're going through like a self-love process, they're going through a compassion process, they're going through a gratitude process. That's what ends up happening. And then their body starts working different. So 2017 is when I released the book, and so I'm saying it's part of this whole re-encounter that I mentioned. This is the re-encounter with spiritual healing. And that's starting to interface with, what I know you are all learning what you have to learn, and it's overwhelming, but still, this is out there, this is out there somewhere. And so it's the idea of treating the seemingly invisible elements of our experience, like our emotional experience. How do you treat that? If that's really what the problem is. And spiritual life, what does that mean in a secular sense? What does that mean in a university sense? Well, sense of meaning and purpose. That's what I'm talking about, your belief system. What do you believe about your place in the universe? Like you don't have to be religious to have an opinion on that. So if these things are real, this is a Shipibo lady, according to the tradition in the ayahuasca visions, when you're in the ceremony, sometimes you see the person who's studying with the plants, they'll see their face covered in the designs, the Shipibo Kenne, it's called, the plant medicine designs. From the visions, they'll go and paint that on the person's face the next day. We say, like, bring the spirit to life. The invisible world indicated. I saw this in my visions, like they say, like feng shui, Chinese medicine, like the invisible, you indicate. Art exists to indicate and address the invisible, that which affects how we feel about things, that which affects how we believe things. The acupuncture meridians, from Chinese medicine are largely intuited as far as we know, or for people's very sensitive, capacity, and also through meditation and mindfulness practice, et cetera, et cetera. Where can we find the related physiology and biochemistry of these things so that they would have a role or a place here in a medical school? Where's the anatomy of these things? So I say the patient is the bridge. So we're trying to illuminate this intersection. It's the intersection between biology, emotion, and spirituality. So I keep pointing to emotion as this place. The emotional biology is established. The anatomy related to emotional biology, there's a lot of knowledge about that. Why does the hair on the back of your neck stand up, when you respond to certain feelings? That's one of Raul's colleagues is studying chills. There's the neuroscience of when you're overwhelmed by something and it gives you chills through your body. That is a physical phenomenon. It's indicating something going on. There's an associated anatomy and physiology related to that many people would describe as an energetic experience, or at least an emotional experience. So we have this psychoneuroendocrinologic network, and I'm saying here's the different elements in the brain. The limbic system would be like the headquarters, the emotional processing center of the brain, which has the hypothalamus is in there, hot first year medical school topic, hypothalamus. The immune system, certain elements of the immune system are in direct communication, with elements of the nervous system, like the autonomic nervous system, for example, and the endocrine system. Like there is definitely a network that has been identified that is communicating. The classic example, a central element of and I thank my friends who just showed up to hear all this medical school talk, but that's what I'm here to try to get across to them. The HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is I would say that's a central element of what I would call the emotional body. It's clear that intense emotional stress causes disturbance in the HPA axis. It's clear that profound emotional healing can lead to resolution of that disturbance. This is a real thing. So, PNEI, Ryle and I were connected to friend Paul Mills, a psychoneuroimmunology researcher at UCSD, and we got a lot of exposure to that. I was at the lab for a couple of years studying the mind-body relationship, psychoneuroimmunology or psychoneuroendocrine immunology. How does stress affect illness? Why are people who get depressed more prone to COVID or viral illness? These are things that are being mapped out. the relationship between certain neurotransmitters and certain cytokine production. It's getting pretty well articulated. Stress and its role in hypertension, like psychological, that it's actually, that it is that, that it's completely underestimated the role of psychological stress and hypertension. Depression, we mentioned how it affects your immune function, wound healing affected by, for example, depression. And then what I just mentioned, the emotional trauma and its effect on the stress response system, the fight or flight system, in this case, the HPA axis. So just little papers that from I was hanging down in Peru, this is from before the book came out, just examples of, these are years old now, autonomic dysfunction and PTSD, like, hey, this is a focus of research. Endocrine aspects of PTSD, implications of diagnosed treatment, pro-inflammatory milieu and combat-related PTSD, independent of depression and early life stress. So yes, they maybe had depression. Yes, maybe they had early life stress, but it's actually from the combat. They're inflamed, according to what they're discovering, this data field. So when we talk about PTSD, we're talking about this beginning of this hot topic of psychedelic-assisted therapy, right? The MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. When you guys get out of school, it's going to be part of your options. That's the situation. When we were in school, it was Raul was the only crazy guy talking about psychedelics are going to come in. Everyone will get ready. Here they come. We're like, what are you talking about? It's happening. By the time you're done, your first year, like psilocybin is going to be available and MDMA is going to be available. The first publication with MDMA, psychotherapy in 2011, they started to show this, the safety concerns and the efficacy concerns. And now it's like breakthrough therapy. Now it's transformational healing. For people, average time to get into the MDMA MAP study is 20 years of chronic treatment-resistant PTSD. So to have somebody like that no longer meet criteria for PTSD, that's considered transformational healing. That's the kind of thing that you observe sometimes in the Amazon. We look at PTSD, so yes, we could say multiple elements of the PNEI network are disturbed. Down there in the Amazon, Ricardo, my teacher, she people healer, they would call that spiritual illness. That's like soul sickness. And how would I describe that in Western terms? I would say when you see that multiple elements of the PNEI network are disturbed and you've ruled out other causes of illness, like there's no major, obvious disease process going on, then down there they would say you should find a spiritual healer to help this person. That's the kind of thing. They're soul sick. And so you need to do something that's going to address this PNAI network. In the case of, in the book, I talk about taking a guy, a Vietnam vet down, he was a family friend of ours, to Peru, and he's in his 60s, been in the VA his whole life. This was like in 2009. He went to Vietnam in like 1970 or 69, something like that. So he's been suffering for a long time. In a few weeks, in 10 days there, he had a major transformation. You ask him, how did that happen? What did you do? What did he go through? I'm talking about like coming home, requiring less medication for diabetes, requiring less medication for his blood pressure, stabilizing off psychiatric medication. He wasn't on a lot of psychiatric medication, but still no longer requiring that. And open enough to start going to group therapy that before he was not open to, and start getting into other integrated practices that really helped him. If you ask Ricardo was a big part of his healing. Ricardo, how did you do that? What did you do? How did you guys help this guy? He says, oh, we're cleaning the energies of trauma and war, from his being. That's what he needed. And he says, you guys don't know how to do that. He says, you can't clean that energy with a knife or with a pill. It doesn't work. You need somebody that's going to approach them more holistically. So what about the biochemistry? This energy that Ricardo's talking about, he's talking about like these stories of their life, that we're healing these stories of their life. Where do these stories live? Where can we find evidence of these stories? I mean, I guess there's neural networks and there's memories and stuff. Are there other places in the physiology that go past that? And so in the book, I also present a case of a migraine headache where there was a lady that was there. So now I'm going through the training. So I'm going through the training as I go, and now it's my job. Now I have to sing to people. And part of our tradition and learning about that is seeing visions. and working with people in a visionary state and trying to help them with song in that way. It's not that, it's just a very interesting tradition that exists. And I participated in that. And this lady was having a hard time, and she plopped down in the middle of the ceremony space, and you can't sit there. You got to go back to your seat. You can't just, because she was too far gone. So you try to talk to her, and she just stares at you like, So you sit down with her in the tradition to sing to her, to help her come back to her center. So while I'm singing to her to try to help her, then the ayahuasca, or that's how we interpret it, that was my experience. It shows me her chromatin floating in the air in front of me while I'm singing to her. And then it shows me like pink, it was pink, floating chromatin ball, protein, right? The DNA, how they packaged. And it showed this little black dragon was swimming in all the crooks and crannies around her chromatin. And the ayahuasca told me, she says, Joel, her problem is not in her genes, it's on her genes. Look there, help her there. This is an experience I had. So I said, oh, wow. So then, in our visions, and we're trying to see the dragon out of the thing and try to clean it that way. But it was, it was deeper than that. It was a broader message than that. So she, we stabilized her. This lady had really severe migraine history. Not that everybody that had big migraine history responded this way, but she did, really severe migraines, worse with her menstruation, like incapacitating for days, requiring a lot of medication to get through it. She was there for 2 weeks. She had a dramatic improvement, like no longer requiring medication to control migraines, mild symptoms occasionally. So it was a big, big deal. She had a big emotional healing. What happened to her? She had a big emotional healing. You check with her, turns out she grew up in a household, and there's a migraine sometimes is related to sensory integration problems, sensory integration overload. So that's why certain stimuli, they create this cascade. So in this case, she's a young girl. Her dad is a raging, angry guy. He's really nice and loving sometimes, and other times he's flipping the table over and screaming and throwing things at the wall, and she's just a little girl. So just somewhere that stress and that intensity and that voltage seemed to be the root of her problem, and she had to go through this really deep process of releasing the energy around all that. Those experiences. And then ultimately she had to go through this process of forgiving her father and accepting him, how he is, that was her process. That's what, she'd been going to neurologists for her whole life. This lady was in her 30s when she showed up. So this idea that it might be epigenetic, and I when I was in school, I didn't hear about migraines being treatable. Number one, that you could actually heal from that, or that could be reduced. That never, I was a doctor, family practice doctor for years. But this epigenetics, it's a hot topic, this idea that there's different ways that the DNA strand or the proteins in which the DNA is packaged could be tagged or marked, imprinted in a way that's not permanent. It's not affecting the DNA code. It could be passed on between generations. It could be conserved, but it's software, it's not hardware. And so now there's a big area. It's turns out cancer is very epigenetic. That's why there's so much environmental sensitivity around cancer. Autoimmune disease, there's a lot of epigenetic concern that it's okay, maybe this isn't just, there is some inheritable component that might make it look like a disease, diabetes type 2. All of a sudden you think, oh, well, they're, it's well, now the kids are getting it. It's that wasn't their bloodline. It's if you put them on this kind of nutrition for decades, yeah, they develop it and then their kids start getting it quicker. But if you change that milieu, the DNA wasn't doing it. It's epigenetic, tendency, vulnerability. Diabetes, I mentioned it, mental disorders, mental health. So this is a big, big area now that the epigenetic imprinting, the effect of environmental exposure from relationships, from stress, from all kinds of things, from in utero experiences, that it would imprint the system in such a way that would be conserved. The system would be conditioned, okay? And we say maladaptive, adapting to something that's no longer useful in the future, adapting to something from the past. That's PTSD. You're stuck trying to deal with something that happened that's not happening anymore. How do you decondition such a thing? Is that possible? We thought, no, you can't do that. Russ, Vietnam vet, Go to medical school, they're like, yeah, go to the VA, they're going to be here next year, they're going to be here next year. They're not going to get better. That was the idea. That's the mentality. Depression, maybe in some cases, but they say, oh, it's a brain disorder. We're in medical school. Oh, it's just a biochemical imbalance. That's what anxiety is. It's not. It doesn't get better. It's just you just take pills forever. That's what it is. So migraine, I never was exposed to anyone that would ever teach me that it could be in some cases related to stress or to childhood maltreatment or epigenetic mechanisms. And so I started from the ayahuasca visions, I started, doing research. I was like, oh, there's a lot of people actually talking about this, or a few people are talking about this. So this is actually kind of possible. So she had her big healing that I described to you, with her father and all that energy and guided by the healers and, in the Amazon and the tradition. So yes, Ricardo, what were you doing? He's like, oh, we're just cleaning the energies from their life, all their traumas, their strong experiences. That's what they need help with, from in utero, from the womb, a lot of exposure there. Infancy, childhood, adolescence, adult life, from their environment, from their relationships, even ancestral stuff, that they could use some help washing out some of that, shedding some of that. So this just as an example, we start opening up this epigenetic question of, papers that started coming out. 2015 is when I got exposed to this. The idea that early life trauma would be related somehow to an imprinting that would affect the epigenetics of the cortisol receptor, and that would be like, that there'd be a window of like development when you're very sensitive, malleable, or if the stress was strong enough that your body would be conditioned to that. And then the window of development kind of stabilizes, and now that stays with you. That childhood trauma now becomes integrated into what you would consider your personality. And that would stay with you, and that would be a root of depression in some cases. So ancestral trauma, there's researchers starting to look at, hey, that some of the epigenetic stuff would be conserved, some of it would be passed on, not hardware, not hard, DNA code, but epigenetic imprints that would be conserved in some cases, passed on. And there was evidence from research from, they're looking at Rachel Yehuda and her crew in New York at concentration camp survivors and their descendants. More frequent, more prevalent anxiety and depression among these descendants, not because they said, oh, maybe it's the parenting or they coming back there. Yeah, okay, that has a role, but not just that. Biological imprints that are being passed on that you can find, with the new technology. Similarly, studying mice and realizing that some of this generational transmission of trauma could go on for up to 6 generations. You could track it in these certain mouse models, by stressing these mice out. So the epigenome ends up becoming this target of treatment. Can we undo things? Can we decondition the epigenome? So we know, well, antidepressants actually affect the epigenome. And I would say parental love or the lack thereof. And they've shown a lot of research around childhood maltreatment or early, adverse childhood experiences, what's it called? ACEs.
ACE. Adverse childhood experience questionnaire.
Adverse childhood experience questionnaire. Okay, so this love or lack of love that, they can show, you can track epigenetic imprint changes and the cortisol receptor, for example, other areas. Meditation, altered states of consciousness, has also been shown to alter the epigenetics. So this is a very curious thing. How does that happen? And then psychotherapy has also been shown to do this. So there is hope to decondition this stuff and move it along. But then, the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is a very exciting area to make some of these changes happen. And that's what, Ricardo, he's like, yeah, that's how it works. That's how you do it. We can heal this stuff. Somebody comes with early sexual abuse, really marked their life, that as a doctor going through school, like we didn't have much to offer that person. That's like, maybe let's go to the next, we can help the next person. Well, good luck, because we don't know how to do it. But then you have MDMA assisted psychotherapy, they're seeing transformational change in an individual like that. Ricardo says, yeah, that's possible. So now I would theorize that psychedelic therapy is healing hearts and souls the way Ricardo would talk about it down there in the Amazon, by healing the emotional body and the epigenome. Like those are ways, the areas that we can focus on that will help us relate to the possibilities of this spiritual intervention, but also is a good area of focus for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So Rael and I were part of a epigenetics project that we ran here at good old USC. We had, I'd written the book and I was sharing the ideas and talking to Rael about it, talking to other people about it, and said, yeah, it would be really neat for a little while. People say, well, let's study epigenetics in the Amazon. We had people from Yale come down, and people there like, yeah, you're right. There's something to this. So we tried to get the ball rolling, but then you have to store it in a refrigerator or I don't know what. And I was in the Amazon and nobody wants to write anything down. And so we're just like,
where's the
I don't think,
IRB?
the IRB. It's like, And so we said, what if we ask MAPS? What if we ask them with their MDMA assisted psychotherapy study, if we could piggyback and do saliva samples on them? And so we asked them and they said, yes, but you have to find the money. So we found the money and we did it. And we funded it, and USC was the home base, and Candace Lewis was the epigeneticist that helped us, and Rael was the PI. You got interrupted by COVID. So the saliva collection was interrupted and we got disrupted. So we had very few, only 23 people ultimately. We were hoping to get way more. But still, with that 23, you thought, oh, we're never going to find anything. That's not enough to find DNA methylation changes. But it turns out it was around the cortisol receptor. And so we ran that study. For me, I was fueled by my ayahuasca vision. Like, that's why we got the money. That's why it's what I explained to you. I said, we think this is probably there. And a lot of people are like, yeah, that could be there, but it was too new for anyone to invest funding towards that. Nobody would give money to that. So I have to scrounge. So I scrounged. And we managed to do it. And yes, it got published last year, from here, from USC. And one of my favorite slides that I like to talk about, and I shared it yesterday as well, is that when we found some of these regions where you could see, when we were trying to find with these low numbers that we had, like, it's going to be so hard to find any significant change with these small numbers and these methylation of these certain gene regions. And we had to look broader because, and this was from my impression from the Amazon and my world with those guys, is it didn't make any sense to me at all. This would just be simple up, down, like, all the methylation goes up or all the methylation goes down. And I'm like, how does they're shocking these mice to be conditioned to freak out over a smell. And then that smell is what they present to the baby mouse that's never smelled the smell before in their life. They smell it and they freak out. That's from up, down. That's how you program that. I don't know. I'm not a computer person, but I know it's more complicated than that. And I know with the computer, we can do what we're doing right now. So there's way more you can do with the switches. So he said, we were all talking about it. I said, hey, let's look for just change, not up, down. Whoever had the most change, see if we can find that clinically correlated with the low numbers that we have. And so you see the people in those regions, where the cortisol receptor related regions, you see the ones that had the clinical improvement, that it was linked to the MDMA. But when you look down, some of them are going way up, some of them are going way down. It's very unique, it's very individual, it's very independent. You're treating people across a very wide range of life experience. So it wouldn't make sense that it's so simple as that. So for me, that was a cool thing. And, this healing and part of our spiritual community in Arizona that's we're going through to try to be able to work with ayahuasca here in the United States. And people hear me talk about that as a spiritual practice, because it is in Peru, it is a spiritual practice. Say, oh, but you're talking about medicine, you're talking about healing, you're talking about therapy. That's not religion. And I'm like, no, in the indigenous culture, spirituality and health and healing are considered the same thing. And this is my little chart. And we're healing people's trauma and stress, allostatic load, epigenetics, and I give arguments around neurogenic inflammation in the book. That would be considered spiritual healing, spiritual growth. Like, you're helping people unblock their emotional being. And when you do that, they have a tendency to have more access to the mystical. That's very common. So spiritual healing is spiritual practice is spiritual healing. They both profoundly impact our emotional health and associated physiology. I ended up putting a lot in this chart, so I'll just get to a little bit more. But we're getting to the, but, just some extra hot things from psychedelic world. Entropic brain entropy, thermodynamic concept of brain function, more disordered, more chaotic, or more unpredictable brain activity when people are on, for example, psilocybin. And that is related to this changing of the connectivity of the default mode network, a neural circuit in the brain. If you psilocybin or the psychedelics, ayahuasca too, can dampen that down, and then brain entropy goes up. And when the brain entropy goes up, that's destabilizing, and it's a lot of things. But it seems to be related to, in some cases, a chance to decondition the brain. Reorganization, you see these neuroplasticity windows open up. Sometimes in response to that, meditation does this too, in a more subtle and steady way. And so when you do that to the default mode network and you kind of reduce the connectivity, at least on psilocybin, very commonly, and you up this brain entropy in healthy people that are not at risk of some kind of mental health destabilization, it's very common that they have a mystical experience. Like, this is not hard to access among a wide range of people. It's like part of how the brain works, apparently. And what is a mystical experience? Well, they just ask them these questions to find out, did you experience the fusion of your personal self into a larger whole? Did you experience unity with ultimate reality? Those are the kind of questions. Did you feel you experienced eternity or infinity? If they did, chances are, their brain entropy was up. But that's not enough. It's not just the mystical experience that's leading to the healing, because with the MDMA, it doesn't necessarily do that for people. And the MDMA psychotherapy, the so-called Molly, the MDMA, does not lead to so much ego dissolution, right? It's just empathogen, and they're feeling more, and so what's the key to those people to getting better? It's not just mystical experience, it's emotional breakthrough. How do you measure emotional breakthrough? They have a little questionnaire. I had an emotional breakthrough. I achieved an emotional release, followed by a sense of relief. That's a subjective, energetic experience. If you tell Ricardo, like, oh wow, I just felt this huge energy release out of a big sense of, oh yeah, So I'm not saying that here, that's the energy leaving you. That's how you know it's there. So this idea that this we're seeing this pan-diagnostic improvement with the psychedelic research, that people are getting better from anxiety, from depression, from eating disorder. Like, okay, so what's the common physiology? What are we seeing if we track it? And they were talking about psilocybin and ketamine and MDMA. And so who's getting better and why? And what's the deal? Well, this is a kind of statistical analysis of some observed use, and they see that it's a shift in emotional processing. The people that have long-term clinical improvement are the ones that achieved a shift in emotional processing. If they study the statistics further, what was the key to shifting emotional processing? And according to this study, it was a shift in spiritual well-being. That it was access to some kind of broader perspective that allowed them the space and the place to go through whatever process they needed to go through to shift something in their emotional processing. And that's what drove their mental health symptom improvement. So I said, in our experience down there in the Amazon, it looks like guiding people through this. Open them up, walk them through self-love, walk them through forgiveness, walk them through compassion, walk them through gratitude. The mystical connection, emotional breakthrough, emotional processing shifts. So they've been studying, they did some clinical research by ayahuasca. A lot of the tribal people are against this clinical research with ayahuasca, but they did a little study and just gave it to people, one dose in a hospital, and people did get better from their depression from this particular study. But like, more interesting to us, the sacred ceremony and psychedelic therapy is like, well, what about in the traditional setting? In the traditional setting down there in Peru, Shipibo was running the ceremony, did an observational study to try to see, if it could work on Westerners who don't know anything about the culture, who don't speak the language, who don't know ayahuasca, who don't believe whatever they believe. But because of some universal part of how their body works, they go there and they receive the treatment, just like when the shaman takes the pills for malaria. He's open to the idea that it might work on him. He's not like, oh, but I don't believe in Western science. No, that's not why it's working on you. So same thing, you take them down there and you walk them through the process. A vast majority of the people are responding. And so this study was about grief, loss of a loved one, people trapped in grief, stuck in grief, can't get over it. The Western approach is not helping them. So they walk them through that. And they had a big improvement. Further study was your people ceremonial use, using some of these spiritual well-being questionnaires and different, scales. I said, this people healing work with ayahuasca has value to improve long-term well-being and quality of life for Westerners. So it's like, okay, we're starting to get at something more universal. So I say, spiritual well-being manifests in emotional health. That's a way for us to communicate across cultures. There's a critical window, this is a new area, just to throw things out at you just for fun, to talk about, that the MDMA assisted psychotherapy, at least with these mouse models, they can show that there are certain windows that, like they say here, critical period is developmental epoch, where the nervous system is expressly sensitive to specific environmental stimuli that are required for proper circuit organization and learning. So we're talking about nervous system regulation. That's what emotional healing is largely about. That's another way to talk about it. When people say, oh, well, my nervous system is more regulated. I can handle my emotional stuff easier. So there's windows of development that you're young and you're designed to learn the language, or you're designed to learn how to walk, or all these different things. And then that window kind of closes up. And it's harder to learn that stuff. The old dog doesn't learn the new tricks. So the mouse, they take them and then they don't socialize them well. They didn't learn their basic mouse social skills. And then they're too old to learn it now. But if they give them MDMA for a period of time, they can relearn that again. So these neuroplasticity windows that are opened, pharmacologically, and that have some role. So I asked, well, what opens the windows? Or some of these substances, some of these plants, some of the meditation, all these different things. Well, what is the window opening to? Question. How do we make the most of the open window? In psychedelic psychotherapy, they have called setting and the session and integration. The Navajos in Arizona, they say, let's simplify it. If you want to prepare people for an experience, setting, you can get really complicated with all the acronyms. You say, no, love. You prepare them with love. You prepare their mindset with love. The healers prepare with love. What they go through is the gift. And so whatever they experience comes with a responsibility. If they don't take responsibility for their experiences, they're not gonna make the change. That's not what it is. So you have a critical window open, chance to maybe recondition, rewire. You have to do something about it. Last thing I just want to throw out at you is this connectedness scale that I've been bringing up, and this is coming out of the psychedelic research world, that they're showing, what is the key, the people that are getting better. They say the mystical experience is a big part of it. Emotional breakthrough is a big part of it. This communitas, perceived togetherness, shared humanity. If they have these kind of experiences, it opens the possibility that it's gonna lead to long-term change, clinical improvement, if you can achieve these kind of experiences. But there's a further scale that they created that's kind of like bridging all these things, and it's connectedness. And the connectedness scale is turning out to be linked to things like this. How connected you are to yourself, how connected you are to others, and how connected you are to the universe is like a factor in your physical health, your mental health. These are realities. Like, how did this happen? This is what we say, when we were trying to make money for the study and convince people to give money to stay, I said, we're trying to figure out, where does the spirit touch the flesh? That was the goal, that was the point. And so that's what I wanted to share with you. This is my Navajo friends coming down to the Amazon in Peru to say thank you to my teacher, Ricardo, for sharing the medicine up north. Just for fun in this whole re-encounter. So thank you, everybody. I hang out for questions, whoever can hang out.
I do want to say a quick thing. We have a couple minutes until 1 for questions. for those who are online, if you put your online people, hello, if you put your questions or comments that you'd like Joe to address in the chat or Q&A feature, we will direct them to Joe. One thing we haven't worked out yet is where we might do it. Maybe we'll just do it here. But for those, especially aimed at the medical students who want to stick around and ask some question and answer both to Joe and myself about this journey in research and clinical work with psychedelics, we are making ourselves available for that for the next hour or so. And you know, some people need to get back to work or whatever. Thank you for coming. But I'm going to turn it back over to Joe. On behalf of the Center for Mindfulness Science, I thank you, Joe, for being here. A personal reflection towards the end of that talk, sitting here listening to my old friend Joe speak on these matters brought me to tears. You know, this was not happening in 25 years ago at UCSD when we were first year medical students. And just to be present for the changes that are happening is very touching. So thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Your question, Giselle?
Yeah, I do. Actually, one of the things I was wondering about, I mean, you know, if you, I mean, how much of this sort of, these ideas that you're expressing, and I really enjoy hearing, exist already in the community, but we're not really paying attention to it. And I say that because, you know, again, I'm spending some time in the community doing some work right now. I'm learning a lot about kind of things that you talk about that we, you know, are kind of new to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
About spiritual, even ideas of what spirituality is.
Right.
You pointed out as health. That's actually already here. You know, we just never taught that. So, in many ways, I'm wondering if, like, if you had this talk, you know, somewhere else in the community, they go, yeah, no kidding, right? I mean, so that's
you mean like
in
a church or something like that, or a community? What community?
The Latino community.
The Latino community. Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Right?
No, most communities. Yeah, that's
it's
true.
Just we don't know this, but it's known.
That's right.
What do you think about that? Right?
Yeah, I think that it's a cultural tendency, you know. So then the materialist culture, that's like the kind of the Western dominated materialist culture, is the one that's less connected to this.
Right.
You know, and so then, and you do see it in a lot more, many other, whatever, more outside of the Western norm, or let's say, you know, the university setting. It's more widely accepted as these are human realities. So then this is what we talked about yesterday, and I always bring it up, is that the hyper-materialist perspective, which a lot of people really cling to in a lot of these academic settings, you know, one of the tough parts about it, of the reality of it, is that it's to feel into this. If we're talking about feeling into it, that's how the Latino community, yeah, it's a more feeling community. You know, you see it in the way they express themselves, you see it in the way they live, you see it in the way they dance. As an example, I mean, there's many people, everybody's different. But the idea is it's more embodied culturally, that's, you know, maybe it's not intellectual enough. You know, my family's Colombian. Like, could we benefit from more structure? Yes. You know, I would say yes.
And sorry, follow-up question to that is, so you live in Arizona.
Yeah.
And you're with an indigenous population, the Indian population there.
It's a mixed group. We have some indigenous, some everybody.
Okay. Well, I guess what I was trying to ask is, do you feel there's some universal? Do you feel, I mean, amongst different populations that embrace this as part of their culture, is there universal? Do you feel a universal message, or do you feel that?
We are encouraging that.
No, but I mean, amongst these different communities that aren't the traditional medical establishments, would you say, oh, right, we're calling it this, but you're calling it that? Have you acknowledged or felt that?
Yes.
From South
Think
America?
about your travels to Africa,
I would say
South America.
100% yes.
Okay.
So I don't think that, so there's
Joe's
political.
been talking about that to me for over 20 years. I can attest.
Well, so
You noticed that yourself,
an
like,
example
wow,
of that is, I've been in Southern Africa, and I had big exchanges with traditional healers from there, and you know, there's different ways, there's different modalities, there's different approaches. I find the same with Chinese medicine. I find the same with Ayurvedic medicine. I find the same with a lot of different holistic techniques, but just between the Americas, like no question. If I come up with, I mean, they may have belief systems and taboos based on their culture, but when we get past that, I have a really, like I'm writing a new book, and one of the chapters of the book is me inviting a Navajo medicine person, an elder, to ayahuasca ceremony, and then him seeing the same thing that I saw. And from totally different training, from totally different approach. So that's, yes, I do believe that there is a universality to the nature of matter, to the nature of consciousness, to the nature of life, you know. So there's got to be some crossover. So that's what we're interested in. So I think that the sciences provide a really beautiful, the Western sciences are very beautiful, like objective measures that people can agree on. You know, so if we say, oh, this guy, if I go to Botswana and the guy's like, yeah, he has a pancreas, so do I, we both have a pancreas, we're not arguing whether or not that we both have a pancreas. And so we can find some of these objective measures that can help kind of guide the conversation. So now health becomes that parameter. So that's what I say. As we're trying to tease out some universality amidst the different spiritual beliefs of the world of how things might be at an invisible level, the objective measures that we have developed now around physical health, mental health. So I'm saying like anxiety scale, depression scale, PTSD scale, emotional processing, emotional biology, cortisol, you know, slope, spiritual well-being, validated questionnaires that are about people's sense of life and meaning and purpose that have been linked to things like inflammatory biomarkers. Like we now have enough there to set some guardrails to talk about more universal discussion. Now it's not as if he tells me, oh, this is how the world works and this is what I believe and everybody should believe that. I want to know, I say, according to our system, your spiritual beliefs, if they're spiritual, it means they're aligned with this nature of things that we're talking about. If they're in alignment with the nature of things, then we should see improvement in those measures, at least some of them. If they're getting worse, then we have to say, maybe your ideas are not consistent with the biology. That the biology should be consistent with this energetic discussion.
If you could just announce that before you finish up.
Yeah. Okay, but we still have time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if that helps, but that's where I'm going with the
I think
universality.
right.
I'm saying the Western system has created a universal set of measures.
Right.
That I think Ricardo in the jungle he's okay with this anxiety scale. You know, they can make a big cultural argument about all this stuff, but some of them are okay with it. You know, this spiritual well-being questionnaire, there it is, emotional breakthrough questionnaire. You know, I don't think it's like such a difficult conversation to have across cultures. That's what we're talking about. There's different viewpoints, but then health becomes the universal unifier. That is that. To me, that's the answer to understanding. And then an interesting framework, at least from the indigenous side, is to say, well, that is the same thing. You know, the Navajo said that's holistic well-being has a spiritual component. That you have an emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical aspect to your life. If your healthcare system does not address one of those, you will not see, you know, the full potential of the healing. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. Yeah, that's my interest right now, is talking about that particular thing. You know, because it's very mysterious. So we were talking, you know, there's a lot of mysterious questions. How do we embrace the mystery? How do we tolerate the mystery? There's a lot of room for charlatanism and confusion, and somebody's telling their BS story to me. And so we can say, oh, no mystery allowed. We can't talk about it at all, zero, period. Although that's a very arbitrary point, you know, because it turns out imagination is completely mysterious. It turns out.
I also think, I mean, one thing that you brought up, I think, and you touched upon at various stages of the talk. I mean, you're trying to find those links to a marker of what's going to be success, right? You talked about 3 ideas. I mean, everyone, you know, you want to find, as you said, some sort of marker that's going to tell you success. You talked about the mystical experience as being one, right? So you want to capture that and see if that's
a potential one, yeah.
predictor. The second one you talked about was
Emotional breakthrough.
breakthrough, correct? right? And that would be some sort of, I consider that some sort of top-down cognitive strategies for how I deal and understand my emotion. I mean, but whatever you want to call that, that's how I think about it. When you tell me that.
Well, we're saying emotional breakthroughs, like it's not top down, it's bottom up.
I would say, yeah,
bilateral,
let me
but
say one
bidirectional,
thing,
but that's
yeah.
just it. And the third thing.
All right,
There's
okay,
a
you guys are,
point I wanna
these are the
make about
experts.
The third thing is actually, is an imaging thing, really, right? I mean, it has that image, I mean, a way to look at plasticity in
Yeah.
real time.
Yeah.
Right, where you're able to show that, as you said, I'm dissolution of the default mode network,
Right.
or
Yeah.
activation of the central executive network, and show that you're actually changing that somehow, right? So you
Right.
have a objective
Sure.
imaging metric as well as some behavioral metrics, which is great. And then the epigenetic is the fourth, right?
Yes.
It's the big one. I mean, those are your four.
Well,
primary-
and the ultimate one is the health of the person.
Oh, no, that's, yeah, but these are.
Yeah, but the predictors are related. Yeah, those are factors that we're starting to track that look like very relevant.
Right, yeah. So
Right.
that's helpful because
Yeah.
that's setting a roadmap right there.
Yeah, the road, so that's a good roadmap, is we're
Yeah.
saying, as you mentioned, okay, the mystical experience is one part of it that doesn't explain all the phenomena, all that we're seeing, because we have the MDMA healing, that they don't get that mystical. So the emotional
Has to
breakthrough,
be accounting for the other one,
yeah,
right?
so the emotional
FDA has to
breakthrough,
account for that one.
yeah, so that's in there, and then you said, and then the connectedness scale
Oh,
is
that
a
was the
new
fifth
scale,
one.
that's another measure,
That's the
yes.
fifth one.
So that's
So
also
some of them are
saying,
behavioral, some of them are genetic based, and some of them are imaging based.
correct. That's right.
And you
So-
right now, you don't have a favorite, you're taking all of them because you're already aware from your own personal.
We're not
experience.
interested in favorites.
Okay, well, no, but I think from your own personal experience, you would suggest it's not possible, I mean, it's probably not one, because you already pointed out the MDMA drug, ketamine.
Yeah.
Is certainly not suggestive of a mystical experience. In other words,
The MDMA,
that
yeah.
would, right, that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah,
That's not a
right,
proxy for
sure,
that experience. So that
sure.
actually told you anecdotally, we need to open this up.
Yes,
Right?
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
No, so yes, I agree with you. So then, but the point is that Ralph Metzner, who's a big psychedelic psychotherapy kind of pioneer, he said something that, and then, I'm not an academic at the research, I don't have to make the arguments that I don't have to frame it any certain way myself, like I'm involved with helping people. And he said that, science is not medicine. In other words, science, the study of the mechanisms and all the knowledge is so beautiful, it's so important, it's so interesting, but it's not guiding us. People would think of them, they're trying to be guided by the mechanisms. They want to be guided by the mechanisms. It's not necessarily that productive, it's interesting. He said, medicine, like in other words, people getting better, the healing should be informing our trajectory of what we're exploring, because there's something there for us to actually address, rather than it's kind of an abstract idea that maybe we're just kind of like going along with, I don't know, there's different reasons why you might do that. But if we're actually working on like health, then that's the guiding force. So then these are different aspects. That's the
That is the
goal.
goal, and it has to hold true.
Yes,
But I mean, it doesn't, I don't know that I necessarily agree with the idea that science is a guiding part. And I think it's like anything else. I mean, you're learning. I mean, it's a learning module, right? You're telling part of the story, you're understanding the story, you're not going to understand completely the story.
right.
But
The reason why is because science, it gets very political.
Oh.
And
well,
so
everything gets political.
that's right. And so then that's,
I
so
don't
that,
think healing is very political.
Oh, really?
That's a place where politics doesn't touch.
I call it Medi-Cal, but I don't know.
Well, no, Medi-Cal has very little to do with healing, unfortunately. But here's one thing, I just want to make this point.
yeah,
Joe's been talking about this model, that the emotional breakthrough, the emotional healing may be more central to the full healing than the mystical for a while. I was kind of on the mystical track from way back. Experience has informed me personally, my current point of view is that if you have some mystical opening that's not embodied and co-occurring with emotional breakthrough, it's likely something in the transpersonal psychology domain we call spiritual bypass. Has no lasting value, can lead you down a track towards deep misery. So mystical awareness on its own is not that helpful for the human full health system, in my experience.
Right. So
As a
then-
person who's experienced that kind of mystical state versus the embodied, emotionally connected type, and in working with my patients, some of whom have that experience.
Right. And so, and I think to me it's important because, and it's not so easy in science, but at some, because people want they're looking for the number one, the thing. So it's like, oh, they found this imaging change that's gonna, but then it's like you're opening on the door to what he's talking about, the spiritual bypass. Maybe you captured somebody in ego dissolution with a shift in their neural networks. That doesn't mean that some of them, that might be an indicator for some of them that they may be promising, but what else? So the idea is there's a multifactorial reality. So the oversimplification, the over-reductionist approach is failing. You know, that's the bottom line. That's the message from the traditional culture. It's failing us. We have to broaden our complexity in how we approach these things.
Yeah, maybe connecting to this point, maybe the set, because it's a complex intervention, the set and the setting is a critical. Like what mindset do you go and take the medicinal plan, and the setting, and also the integration. So if you have some experiences that are really insights and are deep, and how to integrate it, as Rael said, to your life and make a substantial, a life-changing experience. And that's, I think that's something that it's important to assess, and longitudinal studies that are very important to see the effect over time.
Sure, and that'll continue. I mean, the bulk of the what do we have up there?
2 questions
Oh.
from the audience to
The
address.
bulk of the research right now has been focused on legalization. You know, once it's out in practice, it will not be waiting for the academic opinion on what works. The doctors, you know, they're going to be practicing. First one from Frank. Thanks for a wonderful. Thank you. I'm curious if you have encountered any research on the use of music and other artistic activities on the healing of trauma in ways similar to what you described. Physical and phenomenological changes related to spiritual healing. I'm not so aware of that research myself. I know people are interested for sure in that topic, and Rael's wife studies here and neuroscience of music as its relationship to all these things, and so she would be an expert.
She would be. Asal Habibi.
Asal Habibi, check out her research.
She has a lab at the Brain and Creativity Institute, and this is for Frank, I guess. Although I think Frank might be Asal's colleague. So,
Oh, the plan. Is it Asal? Did Asal make Frank write this? That's possible.
But the Center for Music, Brain, and Society, you can check it out online.
Yeah, but it's a hot topic, and music is a basic part of all the.
It's a part of what you do.
It's part of what I do with the psychedelic psychotherapy research. I think across the board, all
True.
published research that I'm aware of, they were listening to music.
Correct.
So it's understated. I heard Tina Calderon from the Tongva people recently talked about the extraction of indigenous knowledge about the full picture, such as ceremony prayer. This was mostly in reference to environmental versus like control burns, without considering the spiritual nature of things. But I think this applies to what you're talking about with medicine. I was wondering from a public health aspect, do you think ceremony has a place in our communal lives, even without psychedelic substance, something as agnostic as meditation, for example? Yes, I do. And so my interest is around, and the cultural extraction, and people would accuse me of cultural extraction. I have my teacher Ricardo, he knows I'm here right now. This is part of us. This is what we're doing and contributing, and people have different opinions about what that is. Do I think that
Frank comes clean, by the way.
oh, okay, good. Prayer and ceremony, the idea is that without substance, that is the goal, for me, or that's one of the possibilities. It doesn't have to be we in our spiritual community utilize ayahuasca as a sacrament. We don't think that everybody needs to do that to come to know spirituality. We believe that for some people, it can help them explore their spirituality further. But is spirituality dependent upon psychedelic substances? No. Like, I do not agree with that at all. And so the idea that, but for some people who have never had any kind of spiritual experience or mystical experience, sometimes that's the first time they ever felt anything like that. And so for them, that becomes their religion. They think it's always from that because they never got exposed to it any other way. But then we learn about, I didn't grow up like that. I grew up in a very spiritual household. And so it wasn't like that for me. That wasn't my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things, I mean, I just thinking really big picture here,
Mhm.
but I think one point that you brought, which I thought was a kind of a good general model for a lot of what you're talking about,
Mhm.
from a science point of view now.
Yeah, yes, I accept science.
It's the idea of plasticity and opportunities.
Yes.
I mean, I think, I always kind of joke about sort of, I mean, I'm obviously I'm interested in lifestyle. I study lifestyle plasticity. And it's all about how do you change that brain, right?
Yes.
And the idea is, well, I mean, there's a reason we close the critical period. I mean, at some point, you may not necessarily need to be going through this rapid change from experience. Otherwise, it's like, would you ever like quote unquote grow up? I guess I don't know, but that's just a simple idea. But with that said, though, I mean, we certainly know that it's hard to change. And plasticity is not easy to do without complexity, without I mean, it's a lot of work to get new forms of learning. So what I'm trying to say is you have this model of plasticity that is, as I said, you're desiring change because you're trying to change habits or ways of thinking of things, whether it's PTSD, whether it's anxiety or depression. These are fixed, as we know addiction certainly is. We certainly know PTSD. So in many ways, the idea here is how do I get access really back to this kind of window of opportunity to make change possible, right? And I want it fast because change in the brain can take time because you need time for practice. I mean, that's all what learning is about, right? It takes time to practice. So in many ways, the idea, at least I see big picture, is the ideas of how to, where do you descend into this network to start hacking away at it in a reasonable, pleasant way. Again, I keep thinking back on the back end from the default mode network, from a mystical experience, or from the front end from the emotional, and I link emotion with prefrontal, but that's just me. You're accessing either through the back end or the front end, right? And as you said, I mean, it's not just enough that you have access, but then you need to move forward with some type of integration, right? Because now that you have this opening happening, there's some sort of learning or processing. It has to stabilize that. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's
those are all interesting. I think it's just the reality, like from the traditional perspective, would be that this is going to be more organic, and the hope that somebody's going to solve it in some kind of way that's going to be so applicable in some scalable way is maybe not as clear. That it'll be different. So these are models of like, this is the kind of thing. So we need to address the neuroplasticity, especially if somebody's stuck in some kind of thing. So they're suffering. That's what's driving the process. So we're trying to address human suffering. So that's why they come. That's why they're going. So that's what it is. The reason why the psychedelic clinical renaissance is here is because the suffering has gotten to that point from the existing options of treatment that people are starting to open their mind to it. Because it turns out whatever they believed about how the brain worked or how it didn't work, as much as they might be attached to that, they're willing to let that go if their family member is suffering under the current paradigm. There's a movie, The Last Shaman, it's on Netflix, of a guy he's related to Harvard psychiatry department somehow through his dad's work. And he's depressed, he's not getting better. And they can tell him all the neuroscience and all the everything, they can tell him the long list of everything they know. Do you know how to help my son? No, we do not. So then all of a sudden, whatever he thought about how the brain works is not so interesting to him, that's at that point. So I'm saying it's the suffering that's driving the change in the clinical picture. It's not, the science is supporting that.
Oh yeah.
The science is supporting that, but it was because PTSD, people are not getting better, this crowd of people, and that it's growing in the society because you have a society where the healthcare system is not addressing any of these issues. So there's an accumulating baggage.
Ironically, the more billions we're spending in the modern West, the more depression and PTSD and anxiety we're getting, despite the more billions we're spending and the more details we're knowing. It's not getting anywhere. That model's not working.
That's the concern, So then that's what I'm saying. We need to. So the model is fascinating, and we love to learn about the model. But the science is not the medicine. In some cases we have to open up to, in other words, does the Shipibo healer know something about the brain or how it works? That, it may not be as simple as that, but can he help that person? And you'd have to listen to him to understand how he approaches it.
The NIMH was so fed up with the lack of progress of the science they were funding that they stopped funding the Bible. DSM is no longer a valid metric by which to obtain funding from the NIMH starting 6-7 years ago. You can't design a study to study MDD and get money from the federal government anymore. You can't. Why? The director of the NIMH identified we really aren't getting any progress doing that. It's such a multifactorial process that anybody's trajectory on the mental illness journey is. And these categories that we have put in place as if they're truisms don't capture a common dimension across the many different subtypes of depression or PTSD or what have you. So we can't study it that way anymore. We have to study it like this RDOT criteria, research domain criteria. We have to look at just dysphoria or just insomnia, etc. These things that are transdiagnostic symptoms of psychiatry. And I'm just saying that because it's really an important and I think related to your point, Joe, that it's not just you or people in the alternative world that are recognizing the psychiatric worldview in terms of its ability to progress on the treatment of suffering of our patients. From the very top is recognizing we don't have it right. We got to spend our research dollars differently. We even have to acknowledge that maybe the shamans had better medicines than Roche.
Well, and it's a different motivation down there, so there's that. But I think this idea of like, well, we're talking about maintaining this plasticity, maintaining this versatility. So this one idea of like, oh, we need to grow up. Like, come on, grow up and get with the model. And so I'm saying, I'm just throwing that out there, just for the sake of conversation. Like, grow up and get with the model. And so when we tell that's what we tell the guy. We said, oh, we're going on epigenetics research. Rao has, through his connections, he has relationship with the head of the NIMH. Said, oh, hey, my friend in the jungle says, hey, the epigenetics, we should, grow up. Come on, guys, get with the program. Turns out, so I told Rael, I said, hey, man, he's not going to get it. I can tell you right now, I can tell, he's not going to get it. So then how do we maintain within the academic setting this degree of versatility that's not destabilizing? You know what I mean? So I hear that side of it, that like, we're just trying to like throw all the stuff up in the air, every week, that we're going to get confused. Okay, that's fine. We need to settle into some stability, but how do we maintain enough versatility, enough plasticity within the system of thinking that we don't get stuck, in a model that is, it's failing. And we know why it was not failing. We know that there's a corporate structure that's doing great on the current model. We know that it's an entire industry that you could, many people here, you can have a great living. You can have a beautiful house. You can send your kids to college, all that stuff, from the system that is being created. But as far as where is it at with anxiety, depression, PTSD, it's nowhere. Turns out in the jungle with no money, no computer, a fire, and some leaves, they're doing better. At least that was my experience as a doctor. Working here for a decade, and then saying, whoa, like at least in the kind of problems that I wanted to. There are other areas, of course, that were light years ahead of them, no question. And they're the first to admit it. They're the first to be interested. So that's the thing. They say the Shipibo healer, he says to me, says, when we see they know how to help, with the surgery or with whatever it is, we say, wow, like that's wonderful. We want to learn about that. How come when we help their people with this, they don't ask that question? So then we know those are they're tricky questions, because they somehow it becomes about, oh, I can't challenge my worldview like that, or I don't know what the question is, like the resistance.
That's your job. That's your job.
That's my job. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do it, and it is. It's an interesting area, and it's an exciting area, But I think there is that. There's the hurt of being discarded, but then there's the herd that's driving the opening. Why does the center in Peru have a website that's functioning, that's creating an entire economy? Because the mental health system here is not sufficient for like large numbers of people. No,
It's almost 1:30.
it's time.
I'm gonna call it. Thank you, Joe. And we're gonna have some time, starting in a few minutes after Joe autographs some books for you all. I think that offer still stands.
Yeah,
hopefully.
if you want a book, you can have a book.
Then we will also, just to be the responsible host for the center, just announce that our next speaker, we have 2 more speakers scheduled, only one of which is on our website right now. Our next speaker is May 15, Roman Politsky, Masters of Divinity and a PhD in psychology. He's going to be speaking on building the plane while it's in the air, developing safe and effective practices in psychedelics by leveraging meditation research. He's at the Emory University Center for Spirituality and Health. And Joe and I both know Roman. He's a great guy. I think you'll enjoy it. It's going to be on the main campus from 4 to 5:30 p.m. on May 15th. So thanks again for coming out. For the medical students, we're going to hang out with just you guys. No professors around to intimidate you, okay?